All right. Welcome to the Time to Grow Up Dad podcast with your host, Chong. And today I think I have the more famous Kwan, at least to my knowledge. The other Kwan who I don't know if we actually, or we'll get to a point where we will do some DNA testing to see if we're actually related. What do you think, Steve?
I don't know, man. We could be related. It's very possible. I'm Steve Kwan, like I said. You kind of hopped into my life a while ago, and I thought, sweet, another Kwan. We're taking over the world
I
one at a
know.
time.
The last name's actually uh, a not very popular last name, at least to my knowledge. I don't know many Kwans, so every time someone has a Kwan, I'm like, ugh, surely we're related somehow.
It's pretty popular
Oh,
where I live
really?
in
Yeah.
Vancouver. There's quite a few of them. And of course, there's all sorts of variations of the name Kwan, right? You also get like
Yeah.
Kwong and a bunch of different variations, and then many different ways to spell the same name. So if you bundle all of that together, it's a pretty big
Yeah.
family. But
Maybe
yeah, you're right. It is very rare for me to see people with the exact same last name
spelled
spelled
exactly the
exactly the same
same.
way
Yeah,
as
that's how I
mine
was like,
is.
maybe
Yep,
we need to
yep.
relocate to Vancouver. Maybe. But for those who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, your accolades, your very your very
Accolades.
interesting career choice, if might I add.
Sure. Sure. So my name is Steve. I am probably best known to the community at large as the founder of BJJ Mental Models. Many people listening to this might have no idea what that is, understandably. BJJ is short for Brazilian Jiujitsu, one of the emerging and growing sports in terms of popularity around the world. It first really landed on a lot of people's maps when the UFC started taking off because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was such a key part of the UFC, especially in the early days. Since then, it's kind of grown into its own thing. There are, I don't even know how many, hundreds of thousands of practitioners, maybe millions around the world of this martial art. I got my black belt in the martial art many years ago, started doing a podcast and building an online database of jiu-jitsu concepts. It's called BJJ Mental Models. Over time, that's grown into its own thing, and it's become, to the best of my knowledge, the most popular resource of its kind for people in the sport who practice. And probably most relevant to this podcast, I'm also a father. I've got a wonderful 7-year-old
Yes,
daughter who I've actually started
yes,
podcasting with
I
myself,
heard
which
that.
is
I heard that episode, and I was actually gonna open up the conversation by asking that. How did you get her into training jujitsu? Because I know on the podcast you sort of
that.
talked a little bit about it. I checked out the episode, but I don't think it was talked much about it. It was just
Yeah,
kind of her rambling about what is jujitsu.
sure, sure. And to explain, I guess, in terms of jujitsu and what it is for people who aren't familiar, it's very different from a lot of the martial arts that people might think of, like karate or taekwondo, which are what we would primarily call striking arts. There's a lot of punching and kicking. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a grappling art. The idea is you take people, you drag them to the floor, you pin them, and if necessary, you put them in a submission hold, like a choke or a joint lock until they give up. And I have been training it for a long time. As I mentioned, I've been a black belt for many years. My daughter, when she was almost 3 years old, we put her into a class at my gym where I train at. And that was pretty easy because these are people that I've trained with for years, years and years and years. I know them quite well, and they have a kids program. So I knew what I was getting into. I put her in there. She was about to turn 3, so a bit on the young side to get into
Yeah, I was
martial
going to
arts,
say
but
usually
because
it's 4 and up, at least over here in New Zealand.
yeah, yeah, but we made a bit of an exception because it was Steve's kid,
Of
right? So we
course,
were able to
going
get
to
her in
pull
there.
the celebrity
Um,
plug.
yeah. That said, though, then immediately after we put her in, after about a month, the pandemic
Right,
happened, and
yes.
so all of the gyms shut down, and so it was quite a while before she got back into training. When the gyms all were kind of back up and running, and she was back into it, was probably around the time I would say she was 5, I think. And she's 7 now. So she's been training pretty consistently since then. Honestly, more consistently than me. She really likes it. But of course, at her age level, it's not really a combat sport. It's more kind of fun and games for kids, teaching them to overcome their fears and try new things. They're not really fighting. I presume at some point in the next few years, as the kids get more competitive, that will come up, and then she'll start having to think about whether she wants to compete or anything. But right now, it's basically like a kids class.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously in the context of jiu-jitsu, and one thing that I've sort of talked to a lot of other parents about is parents have this thing where it's like somewhere deep down in every parent, they kind of want their kids to do what they do just because, like, hey, this is fun. If you do it,
Mm-hmm.
we can do it together, kind of thing. Um, and I was actually listening to, at least as of this recording, the podcast that Jocko did with his daughter, Rena, which was released a couple of days ago as of this recording. And one thing that I took away from that podcast was he sort of really forced the issue with her going to jiu-jitsu, but it sounded like in your case you didn't really sort of force that issue on your daughter. For the most part, it seemed like she sort of just veered into it naturally herself. I know you mentioned you enrolled her when she was 3, but I assume
Yeah.
when she was 5, after the whole pandemic thing, it almost sounded like she just wanted to get back into it, less so of you gotta go and do this thing.
Yeah. I think there was some curiosity because dad does jujitsu.
Yeah.
That's what he's best known for. My brother
Yes.
as well, her uncle does jujitsu. He runs a gym. So I think with so much of that in the family, there was a natural curiosity for her to at least try it out. But we had made the decision well before we got into this that we weren't going to force her to do this against her will. I know that often parents will try to turn their children into cookie cutters of
Yes.
themselves, and whatever mom and dad like, we're going to try to force the kid to do that. I decided when we started this that if she doesn't like it, she doesn't have to do it. But I didn't want her to feel like she was doing things because we were forcing her to do things. There's a lot of activities that a kid can do, and there's no reason why it has to be the one that we like to do. And in fact, I understand that often kids will like to deviate from what their parents like to do because they
It's
don't
just like
want
a
to just do,
rebels,
they don't
just
want to follow
rebels.
them. Exactly. So I didn't really expect her to like jujitsu that much. I wasn't sure what was going to come out of it, but she did. And so she stuck around and she's been training at this time. But yeah, if she had chosen to go into something else, I had already made the decision that I would support whatever she wanted to do as long as it wasn't too crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess curiosity always plays a role in kind of the way I was thinking about enrolling my son into into jiu-jitsu at some point. You know, he's only a year and a half, so he's only starting to learn how to.
You got a while to
Yeah,
think about
yeah,
this.
yeah. Really. I was like, you need to go when you're 2 now.
Yeah.
But he's starting just to learn how to forward roll. And I've been doing a lot of like
Mhm.
getting him on mount and like just playing with him and get him like getting out of like just mounting me. But I think one of the biggest things,
Yep.
that curiosity, I think you sort of brought up there up, because I know that a lot of, funny enough, it's kind of the other way around. At least in our gym, our gym's quite a kids focused gym, and a lot of the parents would actually send their children to train jiu-jitsu while they kind of sit on the sidelines. And probably very common.
Yeah.
And one of the things I tend to find as well, it tends to also work in reverse, where because the kids always do it, sometimes some of the parents that I've seen sitting on the sidelines eventually comes to an adult class, whether that might be
Yep.
a year, 2 years, 3 years even. And actually the other day I had a message from one of the mums, and she was like, I finally tried my first class, and her husband's a blue belt. Both of their kids, I think one's like a national wrestler, and the other daughter is like a really, really good orange belt. And the mum was like, oh, I finally tried a class. I'm like, oh, it only took you, 10 years, but we got there.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. If you want to be a jiu-jitsu gym owner, families are a powerful marketing
Yes.
tool. If you can get one member of the family in, then it's only going to be a matter of time before the rest of the family tries it at least once. They might not fall in love with it, but you know what? If you've got someone in your family who trains this thing and they won't shut up about it, and this goes on for years and years, it's going to get to the point where your willpower is worn down, and eventually you try it one time. And one of the cool things that I like to see is this relationship that jiu-jitsu creates between kids and their parents, where maybe they put the kid in because they hear that jiu-jitsu is great for self-defense and confidence, and then the kid falls in love with it, and then the parent realizes, man, that sounds pretty cool. There's a lot of adults training this too. Maybe I should try it. And then they go, next thing you know, it becomes a family thing. One of our sponsored athletes, Brianna
Yes.
St. Marie, is one of the, quite honestly, one of the best grapplers in the world. She's a world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she's competed at the highest levels. I'm also a fellow Canadian. And of course, she's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and her dad is also a black
Yes.
belt in jiu-jitsu. And it's kind of funny because over the years, I've gotten to know her and her dad just independently. So I know them both, and they're both completely different, but they both love jiu-jitsu and they're both black belts. And that kind of thing is becoming somewhat common as the sport becomes more popular and it's been around for a while. So I think that's kind of an unspoken benefit of jiu-jitsu that you can tap into, which is it's a great connective activity for parents and kids to do together. A lot of kid stuff, it's not super compelling for parents. I don't know if a dad is going to want to go to like a My Little Pony 5-day camp, but jiu-jitsu is something you can go
Yeah,
to.
for sure. Yeah, especially if I think like it's that bonding experience. Back before jiu-jitsu was quite popular. I mean, even now, like we tend to see on like Instagram, at least on like all the parenting Instagram reels and stuff, you tend to see like, oh, wrestle with your
Yeah.
kids, play sport with them, blah 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 blah. And there's just something about like jiu-jitsu, and I see that with a few of parents and kids in my gym. They sort of train together. The kids are 16, like they're smashing the parents basically. I remember like I remember one of my mates boy did something like he was so adamant about like beating his dad, and then he kind of got to a point where he's just consistently beating his dad now, and so his dad's
And then you just
now,
feel bad.
now my friend who's the dad's like he's just really pissed most of the time, and he just complains. He just
Mm-hmm.
complains. It's like, damn it, my
Yep.
boy's beating me.
The
Yeah,
so the
the
circle of
circle of
life,
life.
it's funny when I started training jujitsu, I was much more concerned about my individual performance. But now being older, I've got injuries, I've got
It's
other
like,
stuff
when is
going on
she
in
going to
life.
catch up?
I don't, yeah, I don't care if I'm the one who's beating everyone up in the room. I just want to survive. That's all I care about. If I can get through the day without an injury, I'm
Yeah.
happy.
Well, tell me about your little hiatus, because I know at least from your story, like listening to the podcast, I remember at one point you actually took time off from jiu-jitsu. And
Yeah.
I think that I can't necessarily remember why that was. I think it was something of like burning out to a degree. Was that correct, or was that for other sort of reasons there too? And yeah,
Yeah, there's a few reasons why. When I was a fourth stripe brown belt, and for those who don't know jujitsu, that means like I was about to get my black belt imminently. I actually took a long time off of jujitsu, about a year and a half. Part of it was honestly just because I was kind of burned out through the whole thing and kind of disenchanted. It's 10 years or whatever is a long time to be doing a martial art, and I kind of wanted to take some time off and reset. But of course, the real excuse was because my daughter was
yeah,
born, and I wanted to make sure I was focusing on that and giving her my attention. So for about a year and a half, I think, after she was born, I was off the mats, and then I went back eventually. But I think the important thing about jujitsu is although consistency is the key to getting good at it, really with anything in life, consistency is the key. Sometimes it's also okay to park things and to shuffle your priorities around. And I think, if there's one thing that is justifiable as such a priority is having a kid, right? As soon as you have a kid, as you know, it just completely changes the way that you look at everything. Your life priorities are no longer the same. And at that point, I just felt like jujitsu, it's a fun game, but I'd kind of moved on from it and to focus on my family and other things as well. But then after about a year and a half or so, I missed jujitsu and I'd had a lot of time to think about what it meant to me and what role I wanted it to play in my life. So I came back and I had what I feel is a healthier relationship with it at that point, and learned to kind of juggle that with doing family and doing all of the other obligations that you have when you're a modern grown up in the 21st century. There's a lot of stuff that we all have
yeah.
to juggle, but I kind of came to a balance that was good for me.
Yeah, I mean, here's my question is this literally just me asking a bit for advice at this point. um, so
Yeah.
we have actually got a second coming along the way in a couple months, which is in
Oh,
we're
wow. Congratulations.
yeah in March, and so I remember when my first kid was born. No, I don't know about but I certainly, I was still a white belt in jiu-jitsu, and I was, white belt, you
Yeah.
get into something new hobby, you fall in love with it, you're like, no, I'm going to hold on to this damn thing. And, like, doesn't matter, kids come, I will hold on to it for dear life. And I think
Yeah. Yeah.
getting my blue was probably quite significant for me in the sense where, a lot of people say, oh, blue belt, It's the consistency you put in. Hey, you got the blue belt, great. You put in all the work. Now you're ready to level up. But I think for me, it was kind of more the case of like I was able to hold on to something that I loved at that point in time, whilst having
Yeah.
a newborn, and that was like the first kid. And we were able to sort of juggle that to our best ability. So blue belt in jiu-jitsu to me meant quite a lot. Less so of being consistent in jiu-jitsu, more so with the fact that I was able to not completely sacrifice all my life hobbies just because I had a kid. However, in
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
instance, because you did take a hiatus, obviously with your firstborn, and come back into it, and now me reflecting into the future, having to at least to all the conversation I had so far, having a second child is very different. Um,
So I hear. I have not been courageous enough to go down
yeah,
that road, man. I decided after having one, like, I think this is as much as I personally can handle. I can barely function as a regular adult most days. Having one kid puts a lot of tax on that, and I thought two, man, that's more than I'm probably responsible enough to take care of.
yeah, but of course, you being a black belt yourself, you've been in the jiu-jitsu game for so long, and I'm sure you've seen this with a lot of other parents who come into the sport, stop, and potentially even had a longer time off the mats. 1.5 years, we think that it's a lot,
Mhm.
but we probably have seen people go 5, 6, 7 years even. So I guess my question for
Yeah.
you, and maybe you can shed some black belt advice here. I'm not really ready to give up jiu-jitsu when the second one comes along, but there might potentially be a point in time where I would have to park it. Logically, I know in my head, jiu-jitsu is always going to be there. Jiu-jitsu is always going to be there, but
Yeah. Yeah.
father to father, or parent to parent more so, how would you go about reframing or thinking about, look, hey, family's priority, you understand it, I understand it, hobbies are great, you love it, awesome, but now you actually have to give that up completely, potentially. How would you, seeing, you've seen a lot of people come through jiu-jitsu, what would your sort of, yeah, advice be? Maybe a change of mindset? Yeah.
Oh boy. I've got a bunch of stuff to
Go.
say. I guess the first thing I would say is, of course, as you take on more responsibilities in life and you have kids, you do have to grow up a bit, I suppose, and make sacrifices. But it's also not healthy to sacrifice everything you have just to live for the kid, right? I mean, of course, the kid is the most important thing in our lives. Our kid, our partners, our family is going to be the most important stuff in our life. But that doesn't mean it needs to be the 100% focus of our time. I'm not sure it's healthy to completely give up all of your hobbies. So when I gave up jujitsu, it was just, there was a lot of stuff I had on the go, and it was just the thing that kind of hit the chopping block. But I still had other things that I was doing as well. It's not like I was just slaving away nonstop just to be 100% family focused. I think that to live a healthy, balanced life, you need to have healthy, balanced ways to spend your time. And part of that is leisure and things that you do for yourself. I think it's probably not great to be so self-sacrificing that you only exist to serve your family. I don't know if that's sustainable over the long term. I think it's good to maintain your own identity as well. But with that said, a few things that I would point out. One is that the older and more experienced you get, the more you have a kind of a longer view of time. The example that I often give is, remember when you were in school and summer just felt like forever. Summer felt, those 3 months of summer or whatever felt like so long. Now, as an adult, summer just, it's like it comes and goes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
gone. And that's just because as we live longer and we get more experience, we get a broader perspective of time. When you're a white belt or a blue belt, the idea of taking a month or two off of jiu-jitsu seems like unbelievable. Like, that's almost like quitting. Taking 2 months off of jiu-jitsu, how will I survive? I remember when I was a white belt, I had to take a week off jiu-jitsu and I was like so
Oh
depressed about
man,
it.
yeah.
But once once you've been at it for a while, you realize that, look, in the grand scheme of things, taking time off is not that big deal. Jiu-jitsu is still going to be there whenever you're ready to come back to it, right? People have been practicing martial arts since time immemorial. Whenever you want to come back and do martial arts, they will still be there. The first layoff I took, like I said, was when my daughter was born, but then the pandemic happened and we had to take a layoff then as well. Right now, I've got a shoulder injury and I'm awaiting surgery. That's going to take a while. But you know what? Like, once this has happened once or twice and you've been training for a long period of time, you realize look, sometimes stuff just happens. You have to step away for a while. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. And it's just a matter of having that perspective of time. And of course, if you had been training long enough to be a black belt, you probably would have put so much time into this that you realize, look, if I've trained this for 10 years and I'm planning to train this for another 50 years, taking 1 year off to focus on something else isn't the end of the world, right? It's doable. The other thing too is there's ways to stay engaged even if you're not actively training. You don't have to completely go cold turkey. As an example, during the pandemic, we couldn't train, but I used that time to focus on growing BJJ mental models and talking to other people and creating content and organizing ideas and lessons. And so I never really felt like I had actually quit or stepped away. I just changed the focus of my work. So even if you're not going to class all the time, I mean, believe me, I know what this is going to be like. There's going to be nights where you're trying to put the kid to bed and they don't want to sleep and you're trying to like hold them on one arm. And you know what? You can watch jujitsu instructionals on your phone with the other arm. Like that, it's doable. There's ways to stay engaged. Yeah. There's ways to stay engaged without having to just completely cut something out of your life. When I did it the first time, it was not necessarily because I had no other choice. It was just because I kind of burned out on jiu-jitsu. I was kind of having a bit of an existential crisis about how I wanted this to fit into my life. And I just really needed a break. I wanted to do other things. So I just walked away. And a year and a half later, I kind of rekindled my interest and I came back. And like I said, lo and behold, jiu-jitsu was still there for me. It had never gone anywhere. So I would just say, don't worry too much about it, right? It will still be there when you get back.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've sort of made a bit of a pact with my gym, with the gym owner, obviously my mate, it was like, I will take the morning classes even after the other one was born. Might not come to open it, but I'll still take the morning classes. And so that sort of allows me to kind of go like, all right, like I have 45, 60 minutes of 6 to 7 a.m. Tuesday, Thursday as a bit of a responsibility to go and teach. Now, I might not come up to open it, and definitely not in the evenings, but at least in my head, looking forward, the plan is like, all right, at least I'm still somewhat engaged.
Yeah.
That's the plan. Now, I don't know if that will ever come to fruition because, God knows what happens when a kid is born. Again.
a lot can
change. But in the interim, the plan in place is to try to teach the morning classes so that I still kind of obviously keep myself in the game. And I think the beauty about jiu-jitsu, I think as a hobby for adults, like busy people in general, is like, at least to my experience, consistency can mean a lot of things. Unlike a lot of other hobbies, like, just throwing out there, football, soccer. Do you say football or soccer in Canada? The ball, the one that you kick.
Soccer.
Oh, yeah. See, we see football. But like a lot of other hobbies, you actually have to be quite physically involved, right? Like you have to go in the field, you have to kick a ball. If you want to do rock climbing, you have to go climb rocks. With jiu-jitsu, it is one of those hobbies. Even going to the gym, for example, and I'm a gym rat myself, but it's like you want to get good in going to the gym, you have to go to the gym. But with jiu-jitsu, it's one of those really weird hobbies, particularly in this day and age, where you could go one class a week, but you've got things like BJJ mental models, you've got all the instructionals out there. You can learn whilst not technically being physically engaged in the hobby. And I think that's what is, at least in my opinion, a very cool hobby for a lot of people to kind of get into, not necessarily because you have a lot of time, more so if you don't have a lot of time to spare, you have other avenues of actually still engaging with the hobby. And obviously that's sort of what you did in growing BJJ mental models during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, of course, with any sort of physical activity, if you want to do it and get good at it, you have to do it. You can't learn something like that strictly by just watching videos. But watching videos can help a lot. It gives you a lot of ideas. It gives you something to think about. It can help you organize your own thinking. And in a sport like jiu-jitsu, which is very complicated and there's a lot of moving parts, the way that you think about it makes a big difference. It's not just about going there and doing it. Like, you have to really understand how the mechanics of this work and what you're trying to do, and have dare I say, mental models in your head about how you think the sport is supposed to work. And that stuff you can still work on and still develop even when you're not on the mats.
Sure.
So if you need to take some time off, that's doable. You can always step away physically, but still stay engaged mentally to some degree. And I have found when you do that, when you come back, it's a lot easier to just
Mm,
pick up where you left off. Whereas if you step away and you just aren't thinking about jujitsu at all, when you come back, it's like you have to start fresh again. You have to shake the rust off. It's not so much the case though if you come back after um, studying a lot of videos. Yes, physically you might be a bit rusty, but you still will probably, at least I did, find it easier to get back into it. The other cool thing about jujitsu too is there's also a lot of other things you can do to stay engaged in the sport beyond just doing it. There's coaching,
mm,
there's athlete support, there's a lot of other options and things that you can do to stay engaged. You talked about teaching a class, right? So there's many options that you have beyond just doing it yourself. And that whole community aspect of jujitsu is one of the things that I think is so cool
yes.
about it. We've actually been talking about maybe doing some like parent-child camps, not just a camp for the grown-ups, but also like bring your kid. We all have families. Let's get
Yeah,
them
it's like
together. Why? How come only the grown-ups get to have the fun,
lower
right?
the guilt of being a parent. Like how the parent guilt is a thing.
Yeah,
Like, hey, I'm having fun, but my kids are not having fun. Oh, I shouldn't be having fun. But hey, if you can have fun together, that's a pretty cool thing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, unlike a lot of other people who work, dare I say, 9 to 5 jobs, you have a very, I would say, unique business in itself. I don't think I know. At least I don't personally know a lot of people. Let alone I don't actually know a lot of people who do what you do, running BJJ mental models. And I would assume that running a business, something like that, it probably has a little bit of a different dynamic, I suppose, when it comes to balancing work life, as opposed to someone who's like, cool, I'm going to work, I'll see you X kid in a couple hours, come back at 5, make dinner, spend time. Um, yeah, like how do you balance work life with I suppose, a very interesting job that you have, if you want to call it a job.
Well, it's a good question. And actually, historically, mental models has been something I've juggled.
Oh, I think your audio cut off, Steve.
Opportunities to schedule around work hours. The other benefit too is that so many of the big names in jiu-jitsu, they're not in the same time zone as me. Some of the biggest
Hmm.
athletes in jiu-jitsu are based out of Australia. There's some great folks in Europe. So my off hour might be the perfect time for them to talk. So I can come home after work. I can hit up a recording before bed, or I can do something on the weekends. Maybe it's my Sunday, but it's technically their Monday. And so there's always been a way to figure it out. The nice thing too is because when you're doing the type of content that we do, I don't have to publish it live. So, if I don't get a chance to record it right now, right this moment, we'll find a time to do it some other time. Pretty easy to do. The main thing, of course, is that things like editing take up a lot of time. And I wound up, we've got editors on our team because just doing the editing itself becomes a massive job, as I'm sure you fully agree, right? People don't get
Yeah,
about
yeah.
doing podcasts. Like,
People don't get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like a 1 hour podcast, depending on how much editing you have to do, that could be like an extra 8 to 10 hours of work just to edit and prep and publish the thing. So that's where it starts to get overwhelming. And that's where we've got some help on our team to help manage all of that because it's more than one person can do by themselves.
Yeah, well, I guess like the flexibility does just sort of help. I guess having that ability to go, what, like today's just not the day, or yep, today's the day, and you can kind of go, yep, like I've got time to spend time with the family and stuff like that. Whereas I think most traditional jobs, if you will, are quite set. So I think in a
Mm-hmm.
way, like you have that ability to be quite. Everyone says like kids are quite random. They'll literally tell you
They're
they want to do
extremely
something.
random. They're chaos incarnate. They're very, very
Yeah,
random.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I guess the good thing about your line of work is that it's probably a lot easier for you to adapt to the randomness. because you can kind of go, cool, like I'll put this off for a
Mhm.
couple of hours. You want to go to the park? We'll go. You want to do this? We'll go do this, because in the end of the day, like you don't really, well, I guess most business owners don't have to answer to anyone, but I guess more specifically with the way that BJJ mental models is being ran, you can really just go, yep, like you want to do something for 3 hours, sweet, like I've got, yep, I can always come and do 3 hours when I come back. There isn't really like a pressure situation to like get things out, because like you could always schedule things and put things in the backlog, especially coming into the holiday season. You can just go, yep, put 10 episodes in the bank. Like I can just take a full month off and it'll be fine.
Well, that is the one benefit, right? Especially if you're juggling a day job with doing this on the side, like I've done for so long. It's very important to have flexibility. And doing a podcast, if you're not doing it live, you do have quite a bit of flexibility. So there have been times like this where I've known, okay, the day job is going to get real busy for the next 2 months. So I'm just going to record 2 months worth of podcasts and just pre-schedule them and get them out there. No one knows the difference, right?
It's what I'm doing when the kid comes.
Yeah. You always want to have, I mean, there's a pro tip for people who want to do a podcast. You never want to be the guy or girl who is recording the podcast 24 hours before it's supposed to go live.
You ideally don't do that.
Yeah. You ideally want to have weeks, if not months, of these suckers in the bank so that you can just pull them out when you need them to go. So for that, I mean, granted, it's a lot of work when you're trying to juggle all of that, running a business with doing a full-time job. But the benefit that I had is working in technology. That was already an industry that was generally favorable towards remote work. After the pandemic, especially, a lot more remote work options popped up. So most of what I do remotely anyway. So as long as it's getting done, I can shuffle and balance and make time. But like you said, especially during the pandemic, the nature of my work was critical because my kid was home with me for 2 years. Right. No child care, no nothing. This is before she was old enough to go to school even. So we basically had to both figure out a way to work and get our work done while we've got this 2-year-old running around the house. That was really hard. But luckily with remote work, that becomes possible. You can do things like you suggested and just say like, I'm taking a 3-hour break because my kid is like throwing up on the carpet and I got to go deal with that. But then I'll come back and I'll work 3 hours later and we'll make it good. Right. And it's the same thing with doing a podcast or any kind of business that you run yourself. If you have that flexibility, then you have a lot of control. This is one of the reasons why I was never really interested in running an actual physical brick and mortar jiu-jitsu gym, is because if you do that, you're obligated to follow a very specific schedule and be in a certain place and a certain time. And there's a lot to be said with having schedule freedom. That makes a huge difference. If you can, if you're allowed to be wherever you want, whenever you want, as long as the work gets done, that is a huge lifestyle perk.
Yeah, I think like the pandemic sort of highlighted that. I think for a lot of parents, I think, and the trend definitely at this point in time, not that, if you're a laborer or if you run a brick and mortar, obviously, then that's your passion, great. But I think a lot of parents are sort of veering more and more towards, if possible, some type of either hybrid or remote work. I actually spoke to a friend start of the week where he literally just crams 15 hours of work in on a Monday and a Tuesday to be able to spend time with the family and his kids on the Wednesday to Friday, which I thought was, well, I don't know, about 15 hours of straight work. I think I'll mentally break. But hey, that worked out for him. That's his choice. And
how old is your friend though? Because I gotta say, when I was younger, I could do that, but now, no.
I think he's like mid-30s, like mid-30s, I think.
Yeah, I definitely used to do that. I used to kind of do these marathon work days, and every once in a while now, when I get inspired, I still do that. But I realized, especially when you have a kid, the importance of kind of settling into a routine with them so that they know what to expect and know when you're working and when you're around. And it is hard to do like a 20-hour shift if you've got a kid, right? That takes some negotiation to make happen.
Yeah, you would have to really go like, all right, like we're going to do this. We'll do what you want to do.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Well, being quite involved in BJJ yourself, and of course your kid is also quite heavily involved, I'm sure there are potentially some parallels that you might be able to draw between BJJ and parenting. But more importantly, like, what are some lessons, or what is the biggest lesson thus far into your parenting journey that your kid has taught you that you didn't really expect? In yeah,
You know what's interesting? I guess the big lesson that I learned is how transferable other skills from life are to parenting. But also how at the same time nothing can possibly prepare you for it. So it's kind of funny because on one hand your life experiences has prepared you for this moment, but on the other hand nothing can truly prepare you, right? Like I remember when my kid was born, that first 24 hours, I felt like I was in a car crash. Like it was just total chaos. I was just trying to survive. I had no idea what was going on. I have never felt so overwhelmed in my life. But on the other hand, a lot of the things that I've learned from work, from martial arts, a lot of those lessons are very much applicable to parenting as well. Part of the reason why I started BJJ Mental Models was this realization that many of the lessons that I had learned on the job were shockingly applicable to martial arts and vice versa. Something they will often tell you about martial arts is that you might want to practice these because even beyond any self-defense capability, it gives you confidence, it gives you discipline, it gives you resilience in the face of challenge, in the face of stress. And the way to do that gently kind of reminds me a lot of gentle parenting and trying to kind of negotiate and mentor your child and get them to do the things that they need to do without forcing them to do it in a way where they don't buy in. And that also kind of touches on, at a more physical level, some of the lessons we learn in martial arts about how often trying to force things to happen is the worst strategy. It never works, right? You always want to move around problems. You want to negotiate them. You want to bend them to your will. You never want to try to run right through the wall, right? Because your kids are not my kids, right? I know people whose kids have a completely different mindset from mine, and I'm not sure if the same approach would work. So just like how in martial arts, we always
I was going to say, like, just exactly like BJJ, like, some people are very well known for playing the turtle. So I've heard. And some people just, like Lachlan Giles, just plays inverted guard, and some people just like to play that whole pressure style. And it's kind of, it's funny, like, how there's so many transferable life lessons. Like, no two parents are alike, so no two methodologies, no two parents are alike, no two kids are alike, and so every kid needs a very different approach. It's literally like when you step on the mats, no two people are alike. They might be the same, they might be doing the same thing, right? They're always doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but how you approach the situation is going to be very different, similar to having one, and I guess in my case, like two kids. Like, I might approach the first one in a certain way, the second one would be like a completely different thing. And I totally agree. There's a lot of parallels for sure.
For people who haven't trained jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of moves that we all know mostly generally work, right? They might teach you how to do a certain chokehold, and maybe like against 9 out of 10 people, you can make that work, but you're always going to find that one person where it just doesn't work. I mean, I know people like that where I can put them in this choke and it doesn't work for whatever reason. Their biology, their body dimensions are just different. And I, as a combat grappler, I have to learn to work around that. I can't just keep trying to do the thing.
You can't just force the issue. You can't force the issue.
If it's not working and I just try to keep forcing it, I'm just going to tire myself out while the other person sits there doing nothing. So part of what you have to learn as a grappler is that there are rules, but there are also no rules, because sometimes even though there are things that we consider to be rules or the way things should work, there's always exceptions, and the rules are there to kind of guide you. But every once in a while, you're going to get into a situation where just due to different body types or attributes, the rules don't apply. Things that always work don't work this time. And I think parenting is very much like that, because every child is so different, so unique. And I mean, again, of course, parents have a part in that. But the other thing, too, that I have to learn as a parent is you have to let go a bit, because no matter how much I try to imprint on my child, she is still her own person. And I can't turn her into the kind of person that I think she should be. So people often think that, the parent is the one who is responsible for the child's behavior, but not always, right? Every child comes up differently. And although the parent is
it's
part
already
of that,
built in. It's already built in. The software's there, They just gotta.
You can't turn your child into the person you think they should be. So often, when you're trying to quote unquote parent, you're following the parenting rules that you read in a book. You realize that's just not going to work for this kid. She's outsmarted this or something, and say it's not going to work. She knows the tricks. And I mean, personality types and temperaments matter so much too. My kid is very kind of agreeable and very collaborative. Other kids are not.
That's lucky of you.
Yeah, it is. But it's interesting because seeing my brother's kids, they're completely different. And so you get this kind of cross section of you realize how different every child is, and how much of a failure it will be to try to just teach every kid the same way and to give the same advice all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, we're kind of getting into the 45-minute-ish mark, and I think that was a really good way to sort of, well, not end a conversation about parenting, because I think it's never ending, very similar to jiu-jitsu. It's ever evolving. And I'm sure if we had this conversation again in 10 years' time, potentially everything we would have said would be complete. It's like, I disagree with what I said 10 years ago. It's like,
she's going to be 17 in 10 years, man. I am not looking forward to that. That's going to be a whole other thing.
Yeah, that'll be a whole other thing. That'll be a whole other thing. But before we do sort of wrap up, obviously you mentioned you run BJJ Mental Models. What is it? Where can people get it? Should people get a jiu-jitsu? Fire away.
Sure thing. I'll give the pitch here. So we're easy to find. Just either Google BJJ Mental Models or go to bjjmentalmodels.com will be the first hit. You can find us there. In terms of what we are, we provide educational resources to understand the concepts, the tactics, the mindset, the strategy behind Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, basically the big ideas. And so as a result, we focus a lot more on audio as a delivery mechanism than video. If you go to a lot of other sites that offer online subscriptions, what they're going to give you is probably a whole library of videos on how to do the steps of an armbar. That stuff already exists, and that's not what we're trying to do. We focus more on big picture concepts, big picture ideas. What are the lessons you can learn one time that'll help you in 100 different places, regardless of your skill level? That's where the mental models name comes from. I originally picked up this terminology in the business world, because in business, we are often encouraged to look for ways to make good decisions fast. And I saw a lot of parallels into the martial arts space. What we're probably best known for is our podcast and our newsletter, which are completely free. You can get those on the website. So if you are already, so if you're already a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, bjjmentalmodels.com to check that out. What we are probably best known for at the more professional level is our premium service. That's where you get access to a large library of courses, both audio and some video content as well, plus access to our community, plus a ton of other perks. We got about 550 to 600 members now going strong, so definitely recommend checking that out. You can all at the same place. So that's more for people who already train jiu-jitsu. But if you're someone other who doesn't and have been thinking about it, the only thing I would suggest is, I'm not going to say that jiu-jitsu is for everyone. I know people have to throw that out, but I think everyone should try jiu-jitsu at least one time. Because look, if you go there and you decide it's not for you, that's cool. At least you can say you tried it. It'll make for a good story that you can tell over dinner, right? I tried this crazy martial art. But if like a lot of people, it really resonates with you, you might find that it adds something to your life that you didn't even know was missing. For me, as someone who was never really an athlete, never really thought of myself that way, it added something into my life. It gave me a practice that was very meaningful to me. And it also allowed me to build connections with people very different from who I would normally encounter at the workplace or in my regular circles. So my advice would be I'm going to guess most of the people listening probably don't practice. I would always say just make the commitment to try one class. And if you don't know what it is, or you're understandably afraid to do that, just bjjmentalmodels.com, shoot me a message. I've got resources to explain the whole thing. But I really think it's something that, like I said, I'm not going to say everyone needs to train it, but I think everyone should try it at least once.
For sure. Well, thanks for coming on, Steve. It was great chatting. Great to know the stories and, of course, take some advice. And I hope you listen and grab a couple of nuggets from the episode. And if you like the episode, like and share. I don't know, subscribe. What the cool kids these days on podcasts do. And we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks, Steve.
Amazing. Anything for another Kwan, man. Well, thank you for having me.